Hello, FloodGate family. Welcome to week 3 of How to Rock Your Job Search. We've got Heidi Herrick. Yeah, this is week 3. Heidi Herrick, which is talent specialist extraordinaire, 15 years, hundreds of people placed in the med device space. So glad to have her here so she can impart some of her hard-fought wisdom of the best way to go about your job search. And this time we're going to be focusing on what people always think is the only part of the job search, which is the interview. That's a small part. It's only one part, but an important part. So we're going to focus on that crucial interview stage. And so we got some great insights from Heidi. Guys, as always, if you have questions, just put them in the comments. We're going to be able to see them at the end. We'll grab some of those comments and answer your questions here as we have time. All right. So Heidi, the first step in this overall process is that crucial phone screen, phone interview. So how do you do that right? How do they prep for that? What happens?
Yeah. So, traditionally, this is the first step of the formal interview process. There's a lot of steps leading up to this point that, are pre-interview, and we covered those in the videos from the last couple of weeks. So definitely check those out if you are tuning in for the first time. But for the actual formal first interview, I think some of the important details that people really need to be aware of is that the phone interview step is really meant to be an elimination tool. Hiring managers only have bandwidth to interview in person or virtually, maybe like 3 or 4 for any given search. But generally they'll interview over the phone, call it like maybe 6 to 8, 6 to 7, somewhere in that range. So that's a really important thing for people to know, because they don't need to win the job at the phone interview. Yeah. They need to make a good impression to get advanced to the next step. So some key details to keep in mind about that are there's a ton of distractions when you're on the phone, right? The hiring manager is probably multitasking, especially now.
That doesn't happen.
You've never done that, Joe, have you?
No, I haven't. I'll always
when
focus.
You and I are on the phone, you are 100% engaged. But yeah, just expect your audience to be, doing other things, as much as we hate to say that. So using a lot of vocal inflections, maybe going a little bit overboard than you normally would with your enthusiasm, to really drive home that you're excited about this and you've got a lot of reasons why. So some things to be mindful of for that phone interview. I would recommend having one really clever question. Not creepy, like don't ask them something strange about their, college internship that would weird them out. But one clever question that if they've done 7 phone interviews, they're going to, over dinner that night with their spouse, say, you know what, this candidate today asked me this really unique question, and that'll really help you stand out. And then also really having some good, obviously some good background information on the company.
Yeah. Doing that research shows you're hungry. That question usually comes out of that, is great. You're talking about energy, Heidi. One of the things that I always do anyway, like now, is I'm standing when I talk, right? That provides a little more energy in your voice, surprisingly enough. So you have a place you can stand while you do it. I think that adds a little energy. That's a preference thing. Yeah. And then, one of the things I've heard too is you can ask the questions of, hey, what does it take to be really successful in this role? And you get by. They just gave you the answers to the test on the final interview.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Genius.
Cool. All right. So the next step in this process that is now almost universal, the video interview, right? So how should a job seeker, know how to prepare, and how do they deal with this step? What are some of the things they've done well and some things they haven't?
I saw something on LinkedIn from a friend of mine. He posted, I might butcher it, but he said the quote for 2020 was, "I think you're muted."
I think you're right. Yes. Yeah.
So I think honestly, the video interview, the biggest thing is just like tech. People don't know that when you're video interviewing, you're requiring so much more of a stronger internet signal. So you need to, I mean, I hate to go there, but just make sure all of your other devices are shut off. If your kids are on YouTube, close all that down, get hardline to the internet so that you are just flawless with your tech. Other than that, I think the video interview is really similar to a face-to-face. You should be preparing for that in the exact same way as you would a face-to-face. So you want to be dressed the exact same way. You want to be prepared in terms of your research, your questions, all the same as a face-to-face. So 3 things that you should be doing in a video interview or a face-to-face interview is think about this. Why me? Why them? And why now? And boiling it down to those 3 things helps you set the stage for that entire interview. I will tell you that almost all candidates stop at why me and why now. And they totally miss or overlook the why them part of that equation. Everyone's really good at selling themselves. They practice in front of the mirror. They practice with their friend or their spouse, and they know why right now is the right time. But this is the one thing that candidates miss again and again is why them. And sadly, that's what employers are most interested in, right? They want to know what are you going to do for me today? So candidates have to connect that dot between here's all the reasons why I'm a great fit for this role, but here's why I'm going to be a great fit for you. And here's how I'm going to help you move the needle. And here are the things that you're doing, your mission, your vision, your future, all of these things that I can help build momentum with. And so that is really the area where I think job seekers need to really buckle down with.
Yeah, that's a great point because, in all through this process, a great leader knows that if they have their team here, this comes along, right? Yeah. So you got to show them you've got the heart, the excitement, the willingness. And if that comes through, it just creates a connection that's hard to break. One other thing I've heard on the video interview, something we do here, make sure your lighting's right. You can get the little cheap lights, whatever, but if you're dark and you're looking like you're, being sequestered by the FBI and on one of those, not going to really sell, right? So make sure your lighting's right. Make sure your background isn't distracting. Had a candidate, had a couple stacks, had a couple empty beer bottles behind him. Not exactly for the 10 o'clock interview that exuded that level of confidence. All right. So
don't have your kids running back and forth in the background.
It is 2020, so I think everyone has dealt with that enough. It has has a little bit of grace this year on that, but if you can limit it, it's better. For sure. So you mentioned a couple good things on that next step, that face-to-face interview, and gave some great tips. It's very similar to the video interview, but you want to ace that face-to-face interview. What do you got to do, Heidi?
Yeah. So, this is where all of those things that people don't like to talk about come out, so this is when hiring managers nitpick candidates, like they nitpick. So when I say that, I mean, this person was a close talker like this. This person had a weak handshake. This person, their breath smelled like, that's a hyperbole, but they are almost looking for all these little things. This person, when they pulled their resume out of their briefcase, there was clutter everywhere. So they're kind of looking for reasons to knock people out. So you got to make sure that your presentation is just nails and flawless. So that means having your stuff organized. Your questions should be printed up, easy to access. Obviously you're dressed as you would going to an interview, suit and tie, clean shaven, go easy on the cologne, perfume, etc. But for the interview, as far as the content goes, you can never be too prepared. You can never have done too much research. And this is where interviewers are normally looking to see what kind of initiative someone's taken, right? How much do they know about us and our business? Not like a fact check, but do they really understand what we're doing? And can they anticipate what our challenges are and what those problems are that we're going to face tomorrow. And are they able to even talk through like, hey, I noticed that you guys are doing blank, and I was wondering if you're struggling with this particular issue. Have you thought about doing X, right? So being able to tease out not just why I'm a good candidate, but let's talk about the challenges that your organization is facing. And I have some ideas on how that could be solved. So
start to see you in the role. Right. Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah, no, that's a great point to be able to, imagine they're already knowing where their pain points are. And if you've asked that during the phone interview, if you had that opportunity, to bring those back up, do some research, come up with some ideas. It's a great suggestion.
I mean, things I didn't mention, I think they're assumed, but clean, hard copy of your resume, right? Bring an extra copy. You never know if a rep's going to jump in, or maybe a peer or a boss. So have those prepared. Have questions that you've prepared in advance. The litmus test that I suggest to my candidates is, if you can get the answer with me as the recruiter or on the website, it's not a question you should ask during the interview. These questions that you're saving for the interviewer need to be really well thought out, and they need to be strategically directed towards them and what's specifically going on in that territory or in that region. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned me as the recruiter. So another tip for the interview is rely on your recruiter. They know so much about the interviewer and about the organization. They're a gold mine of information that a lot of candidates just don't tap into. So before an interview, and this really even goes for the phone or the video too, but ask your recruiter, hey, what should I know about this interviewer? What's their background like? What are their hot buttons? What are their pet peeves? And you can pull out so much information from your recruiter that the savvy candidate will do, but the unsavvy candidate will just think that he or she can just kind of DIY it. Yeah,
no, it's true. I mean, might as well get as much information as possible so you can adjust.
Yeah.
Now, and one of the things I always like to tell people in an interview is, whether it's, a lot of times situational interview styles, or at very least your past results are going to be a predictor of your future experiences, future successes. So have some of those stories, right? Not just generalities, because a lot of times, even if they don't do any stumbles, they don't know why they're not moving forward because they don't get any details from it. So make sure that you have that couple of those great stories, and not just, hey, I won, Memorial Hospital IDN system. No, here's what we had to do it. Here was the challenge. We were up against an entrenched competitor there for 20 years. They were dropping price. We couldn't drop price. So I knew I had to get to these 3 clinicians and, tell the story.
Yeah.
Right? Because if they're like, what? Man, I wish my people would do that. Well, I think you're going to get the job.
Yeah.
So tell a great story, practice it. Don't assume you're going to remember it when the time comes.
That's so true, Joe. That is so true. I glossed over that, but having really a good handle on what you've done and being able to tell your story in a really captivating way is so huge. That's going to be part of every interview that you go on. Tell me your story. Tell me about yourself. So you got to have a really compelling hook to capture their attention and engage in a great conversation. And to your point, having great specific data is so critical. I have a lot of hiring managers that say, well, the interview started off great, but once we got into it, meaning once we started getting into the specifics of, how you move through your sales process, for example, the candidate really fumbled and could not articulate specifics about the different steps or about a particular account or a particular story. So that's a really, really great suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of brings us to this last thing. We're going to bring it home, right? So this is, that final interview. What do you recommend to bring it home to, make sure you're the one that walks away with the offer in hand?
Yeah. So typically final interviews are done at the corporate office, at least in the medtech space for sales and marketers.
In a pre-COVID world. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess my advice is going to be about that that environment, and then we'll make some adjustments for the current time frame. But assuming you are going into a corporate environment, consider that every single touch point that you have is a stakeholder to that decision, right? So the receptionist, you treat that person as though they're the decision maker. Typically, you'll meet with someone in HR, someone in marketing, someone in ops, someone in senior leadership, right? So you need to have researched each person that you're going to interview with, and have specific questions and an agenda for each of those meetings, and treat each one of them as though they were the decision maker. Those people that you meet with are generally looking for organizational fit. And so they're not going to dig into like the nuts and bolts of your background. They're going to trust that the hiring manager did that. So it's really important that you're considering and being sensitive to what their organizational needs are, and using that intuition to sense what they are thinking about, or maybe what their pain points are for what is best for the team, not just for this specific role.
Yeah, no.
And then you're asking for everyone's endorsement. You need to be closing every single person that you talk to or meet with. You need to be asking them for their endorsement to the actual hiring manager.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Nate, that's great. Great suggestion. And then when you get, finally to that final step, is, hey, always keep asking for that. So am I ready? What's the next step? How do I get to the next step? So you're making sure you have that close.
Yeah. And I would also recommend, compensation is something that it's like this dance. People don't want to bring it up, and hiring managers rarely bring it up. So that's a good thing to cover with your recruiter ahead of time, and have that conversation with him or her just to make sure you're aligned. So at a final interview, they might say, what are your expectations for earning or for income? Yeah. So you want to just have had that conversation already, so you're sharing a number that's realistic for them, so you're not totally like on different pages.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely, with your recruiter early on, make sure you cover that. So you don't get to the end and go, wait, I thought I could negotiate up that high.
Yeah.
For this company, that just doesn't happen. So
yeah. One more thing about that too, Joe, and I maybe just assumed this, but I'm realizing now it might need to be spoken, that by the time you get to a final interview, you really need to be mentally and emotionally committed.
Yeah.
If you're not there yet, if you're kind of just vetting it and going through the motions, it's just going to be a big waste of your time. Generally, companies bring 2 finalists in. That's been our experience. Almost every single one of our clients has 2 finalists that comes in for that last step, and they're going to smell that a mile away. So if you got reservations, or you're sitting on the fence, flush that out ahead of time. Flush that out with your recruiter. Whatever questions you need to get answered, you need to have, by the time you walk into that final interview, you need to be fully committed to joining that team.
Yep. Yeah, I agree, because it's going to show. Yeah. Those nonverbals, you can't hide them for multi-interviews.
Right.
At all. It's going to come out.
Yeah.
That's great. Great, Heidi. I know we have some questions. So, I got Lisa asked a question. Can you give an example of a clever question that you would recommend someone to be prepared for?
I've always loved the question, what keeps you up at night? Mm-hmm. Professionally. I think that's obviously a generic question that you could fine tune for a specific opportunity, but that would really cut straight to the heart of the matter with a hiring manager. They would be probably stumped by that. Yeah. But I think it would break down a lot of barriers, and they would open up about what those obstacles are in their business. And you'd learn a lot with that question.
I like that. I like that one. It's open, but inquisitive, and let them answer. That's great. Yeah. So can you give specifics on contracts without breaching an NDA? Is a question I got from Steven. I'm assuming he's probably talking about maybe like the IDN agreements, GPO agreements, things like that, maybe. So, Steven, I would just say if it's public knowledge, feel free to share it. That, if someone really, really wanted to dig in, they could find out if you were on a contract or had an agreement. I think if it is really, truly private, probably not a good idea to share that. If it's necessary for the role, very few, usually in engineering type jobs or product development where they need to understand how they'd approach a problem, would an NDA come before an offer. So it looks like he's asking like a big win. I usually, it depends how close of a competitor it is. I don't think if you've had that big win, usually that's going to be fairly public by the time you're announcing it. If you just had it and they're in the same competitive space, yeah, it's probably not a good idea to show it. You can say, hey, I've had an account, here's a story. But if that's the case, you probably have another story farther back, which you can talk about, and I'd be prepared for that one. So, and I have a couple other questions. Brag book or business plan, that 30, 60, 90 and the brag book ready. What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question that you've seen change over the times. When I first got into recruiting, that was really like a standard thing. Everyone brought their brag book and a business plan to the interview. I think that's changed. I think the brag book is still a good idea to bring to any interview. I wouldn't bring like a trophy or, anything that's just super obnoxious, although people have done that.
Little EQ, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. The business plan. So that's an interesting question. I would say that it's all about timing. Generic business plans are like cover letters. Like nobody reads them, nobody's interested in them, and they're just a waste of space. So if you're of the mind that I'm going to make this business plan and then I'm going to make these slight adjustments for every job I interview with, I would say that's probably a poor use of time. I would not do a business plan until you've had at least one interview and you can really put some specific thoughtful attention into it. So the business plan is only as good as it relates specifically to that opportunity.
Yeah. A generic business plan is going to get generic attention. If
Right.
You can get some specificity to it, which kind of leads into the second question a little bit you have here is, what about reaching out to people in the company in advance of the interview to learn more, or the company as a whole? So what's your thoughts there?
So that's just such a good question. And I think it depends on the company. Some employers love that. They love that assertiveness, that initiative. And others, I've seen it kind of be a turnoff. So I'm sorry that the question is a little bit two-part, but my advice would be, if you're a job seeker and you are savvy and you have the time and the bandwidth to make an outbound outreach, meaning to someone that might be your peer or another manager because you want to gain some intel, I would check with your recruiter if you're working with one and let them know, hey, I really want to reach out to Brad. He lives in Connecticut and he's the RSM or whatever. Is that cool? Right? So you're just kind of getting their blessing so they can let the manager know. If you're not working with a recruiter, I would suggest giving the hiring manager a heads up. It's a courtesy. I'm really excited about speaking with you on Wednesday. I've made contact with Stephanie in corporate accounts, and she and I are going to connect this afternoon. Just as a heads up, so they're not totally thrown off when you get to the interview and you've talked to all these people and they're like, whoa, I didn't know that was happening and that wasn't part of the formal interview process.
Yeah. And now one that I find very effective, especially if you're in a similar space or an adjacent space, and you can speak to a customer, a clinician in the space and ask them about the products that they might be using, if they're, or what their thoughts is of the company and what interests them, and get some of that feedback. Now that's always, welcome, and it also shows that I have access to your customers already. Right. So it does two things. I think that's very proactive. and frankly helps you understand, is this company I want to work for? Because if the customers are going, I love it, I can't get enough of the product, I'm going to change all of my protocols, it's probably a good thing to, be leaning into.
Absolutely. And that question brings up just the suggestion, going full circle back to the interview prep. Something that you can do as a candidate to stand out in a sea of equally qualified candidates is to do just what you just described, Joe. Find an end user, find a caregiver that's used the product or the technology, or a patient who's been on the receiving end. It doesn't take that much effort to do that, but it's amazing the impact that makes with a hiring manager. Out of 5 candidates that are all relatively equal in skill and talent and drive, that one candidate that goes that extra mile and says, hey, I spoke to, Rose, the head nurse at such and such facility, and she had great things to say about you, blah, blah, blah. That's almost always the deal maker.
Yeah, that's a great thing where you can do that. So I got another question from Justin, a highly specific versus generic. And I think maybe as a follow-up on that NDA, what to give up, I would, if we're struggling, if it's a line you think you're going to cross, if you've had a good career and you've had successes, stay away from that one. Find one that you can talk about openly, and an example that tells a story that's your value, where you can be specific enough, to make an impact of the story, but not something where you're going to step on a landmine, would be my suggestion. Justin, if I'm understanding your question wrong, put a little comment in there. I'll answer that differently. Right. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time today. We're almost up to our 30 minutes. We're pretty good about wrapping up right on time here. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. Put a couple arrows in your quiver, so you are going to be able to take down that next best job when you get to that interview stage and stand out from the crowd. We also have a lot of other information on our FloodGate site, videos on how to interview, et cetera, that please lean into. Let me know. And also we have the 4th series coming up. And if you missed the earlier ones, they're on our LinkedIn page. And Heidi's even doing a little boot camp. So if you are interested in that, ping Heidi directly through LinkedIn, or just message here and we can get you the information on what that boot camp looks like. But hopefully this helps you land your dream job, and we'll see you next week.